Jewel rushed through the library of her school. She was going to be late to meet up with her friend Eve. The gossip in Genesis College was that the continent was warming up due to the discovery of some god in Rotoa. Or was it in Warcrawl? No one seemed to know for sure, but the warmth spreading through Isla already reached Genesis, which was in the middle of the two towns. When she made it to the exit of the school, Eve was waiting patiently, talking to one of the boys. Upon sighting Jewel, Eve shooed him away. If this weather keeps up, they need to change the school uniform. Eve laughed as she hugged Jewel. Jewel started fanning Eve with the book she was carrying. It's like we woke up in a totally different world. Both girls started walking out of the school. There was still some snow on the ground, but it felt like they were seeing the dirt for the first time every time they saw it. It had been so long since any parts of Isla weren't covered in white. Eve continued their conversation. I bet you're loving this. Isn't everybody? Why me specifically? Jewel asked. Well, you're always one for the theatrics. Eve stepped ahead of their pace and did a twirl as she said the words. I bet you wish Nouvelle would float down with angel wings and carry you off to a nice warm garden where he will whisper you sweet nothings. Stop it, Jewel blushed. Nouvelle is far from an angel. He's just a Fenin, a very handsome Fenin, who just happens to be the best poet I've ever heard speak. Eve laughed. Okay, fine, he's no angel, but he isn't a poet either. His poems don't even rhyme. It doesn't have to rhyme to be poetry, Jewel assured her. Come on, you can't tell me his works aren't beautiful. You can't tell me they don't move you. Jewel was the one to step a bit ahead of their pace now as she jumped up on a newly visible fountain that was once buried in so much snow you couldn't see it. She almost slipped in from the remaining snow and ice before catching her balance. She held out her arm and began to speak in a tone mimicking her beloved poet. Let thy petals float across the blue sky, painfully planted in the white company of its family. Frost settles in where once a heart did beat. Broken. She closes her eyes. Hoping for a new love to warm it, hoping for a devotion to make it whole again. She opened one eye to make sure Eve was still watching and noticed her walk on by. Get down, you're embarrassing me. Eve laughed as she continued on. Jewel caught up. Besides, with all the snow melting, your love needs some new material. Come on, you have to agree that... Jewel gasped, like someone sucker punched the air right out of her. Jewel? She heard Eve yell her name as if she was standing right in front of her. Then again, Jewel? But this time it was fading, like Eve was far away from her. Each time Eve yelled her name, she drew further and further away. Everything in front of Jewel was blurry, and the gasp gave her the feeling like she had completely stopped breathing. But then suddenly returned. When it did, she was standing exactly where it happened, but Eve was still a blur despite being right next to her. The only thing that stood out among the background of wherever she was transported to was the melting snow. Out from the fuzzy vision before her came a tear. It didn't seem to rip into what she was seeing, but rather like it was created out of thin air. Each side of the tear was pulled apart by long fingers that seemed to push her world apart. Out stepped something, not someone. A machine of some kind, given a Fenin form, trying to poorly replicate those that inhabit Fenrir. Its body and face were metal, and its metal eyes were shut, but it was hard to tell if they could open at all. Its long metal finger reached out toward Jewel. She was frozen, unable to move, as it placed its finger lightly on her throat. The mouth of the machine began to move. Jewel waited to hear what it had to say, but the moment she heard noise, everything went black.